Hello, everyone. We're back again. We've done 3 of these now. We're keeping to it, like sticking to our word. How are you doing, Steve? You all right?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired, but I'm excited to talk about some RPGs today.
Yeah, wicked. But before we get into whatever we're talking about, we have the small matter of the 12 games that we promised that we would play this year. Last time we checked in back in February, it wasn't looking too good, and we hadn't played any. I can confirm that I have played Deadline, and I've got the proof here. Deadline, I had a really great time with Deadline. I only played a quick game. If you don't know, it's you kind of it's a little like the Quiet Year. You make a map of a city and you break down its districts and you define its history and its peoples and all this kind of stuff. But then the cool thing is you generate these news cycles and you write about what happens in all these districts and you write about all these conflicts and you write about these interesting things that happen. And you can play it over the course of many news cycles and kind of build out this really rich history and story of the city that you're talking about. You kind of chronicle its activities. And I just played it through once, just on my own. I'd love to play it with another person. I had a really good time with it. And the exciting thing is, some of the stuff that I generated is going to be in my next episode of my Sundered Isles campaign because it was just
Ooh,
very cool like idea, and it was a thing that's like unrelated to what's going on in the main campaign. But then I kind of thought, actually, what I've come up with in Deadline fits really well with something that one of my factions would be doing. So we open the next episode of my Sundered Isles campaign seeing what I generated in Deadline, but in the Sundered Isles, which is very cool, and I really like that. So, Steve, I'm leading you 1-0. Have you managed to get any games to the table?
well, you know what? I have been on a bit of a tear the
Oh,
last couple of weeks. So, 2 weeks ago, I ran Eat the Reich
yeah.
for a couple of my friends. So, I had uh, one player who was out of town, so we were gonna run it, and then another player who got sick. So, I only had 2 players and myself, but we had a grand old time with it as we tore through Paris, destroying Nazis in the most high action, gruesome manner possible.
Mm.
And I can 100% confirm that it is a ton of fun to play. And definitely, we got to the end of it, and the 2 players were like, man, when the other 2 get back, we got to play this again.
Oh, that's cool.
So I feel like that's a pretty good uh, review of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 2 weeks ago, and then last week we still had one player who was out. So I ran a one shot of Stars Without Number,
Oh, nice.
and yeah, and that was a lot of fun as well. And what I sort of suspected would happen happened, which is of all of the games that I have brought to the table with my gaming group, uh, this was the one that they were like, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I feel like I would definitely like play a campaign of that. Whereas
Mm.
like with Eat the Reich, it was very much a like, yeah, it's a good one to pick up and play for an evening, and it's fairly disposable. You don't have to really think about it. Um, Whereas we got to the end of the Stars Without Number one shot, and they're like, yeah, I feel like, I would be happy to play a campaign of this. And I have been trying to get them to be excited to play a campaign of something other than D&D for a while. And I think probably because Stars Without Number is essentially like old school D&D mixed a little bit with the skill system of Traveler, that
Mm.
it's like familiar enough of a gameplay loop that they're like, yeah, this works for us. Which, hey, that's great. I have been wanting to run a sci-fi campaign, so we haven't yet decided if we're going to actually follow through on that and run a Stars Without Number campaign. But I feel like if I suggested it, there would not be much pushback on it. Um, I did cheat a little bit by because it was the 3 of the 4 players are the 3 that I've played with the longest, and we had a long running campaign, sci-fi campaign, using Scum and Villainy
Mm.
that we played before COVID, and it's one of our favorite campaigns that we've ever played. We had an absolute blast with it. So I basically brought in those characters. I homebrewed, or not homebrewed. I created those characters in Stars Without Number. Didn't tell the players I was going to do that, and so I kind of
Nice.
handed it. So it was like, it was a very cathartic experience as they sort of slipped back into those characters, and we played a pretty fun, breezy one-shot session. Which yeah, so aces on Stars Without Number as well. So I'm 2 down, and Matt, I also played in a play test of Legends in the Mist, which is was that one of your games that you wanted to play?
We don't get points for playing each other's games. Like, I'll say that much. But like, yeah, I mean, you're wasting your own time, Steve. You could have been playing one of your games.
Could have been,
But yeah,
but yeah,
I mean,
it was fun.
was it? Yeah, was it good? Because
Yeah,
I kind of keep looking at it. They keep releasing these kind of
yeah.
incremental, playtest revisions, and every time I look at it, I keep thinking, now is this the most elegant game design of all time, or is this really cumbersome? I cannot tell at this point. I don't think, for me, someone who's got, because you've got a bit of experience with City in the Mist, haven't you? I don't have any experience with it, so like I kind of need to see the full rule book before I can kind of go for it. And I know they've released the grimoire with the basically it's the guide to basically how you do everything in the game. But yeah, and you had fun with it, and did it seem flexible, and did it seem fun and elegant, or did you find it a little bit awkward?
Yeah, so we had a lot of fun. I'm not sure how much of that was the game versus the actual like session that the game master ran. So we played the I forget what it's called. I think it's called like the Tinderbox or something like that, where
Yeah.
it's the like quick start rules. So we just had pre-gen characters, but he did a really good job of presenting the scenario and like really making the world feel lived in. So like it was a lot of fun because it was basically we're hanging out, role playing, and exploring this. I felt like the system was fairly intuitive if you are kind of on board with it.
Mm.
And so there were definitely a couple of points where I think we overused tags, both positive and negative. And so there was one point where I pulled on like 7 or 8 tags, which I feel like is too many. But it also, like, they all made sense in the moment.
Mm.
Um, but also I still only rolled at like a +2 or a +3 because there were so many negative tags that were counterbalancing it, that I kind of, at the end of the session, I was like, I mean, did any of that really matter? Like,
Mm.
yeah, it was fun to be like, oh, I'm, a defender of this village, so I'm going to pull on that tag, and I'm going to pull on my, ferocious strength to, do this other thing, and all of these different things. But ultimately, I still just came down to rolling like +2 or +3, and I'm like, I feel like it might be a little overcooked for
Mm.
that.
I think
I think
from
part of it too.
reading the rules, it looks like you can just go overboard.
Yeah.
Like you can just, like your example there, just say, well, actually, I'm
Mhm.
also stood, I've got a tailwind behind me. So, and then, actually my
Yeah.
opponent's slightly in a bush. So it's like, you
Yeah.
have to, it probably, and you probably found this as well, you probably have to find that middle point where both the GM and the players know exactly what's too
Yeah.
much, basically.
Yeah. And that's where I think I really enjoyed the session, and I think we're going to play a few more sessions of it. But it feels more like a game where all of the players have to have the same basic expectations and the same basic approaches to playing games.
Mm.
Whereas if you sit down to play D&D, it's pretty clear if you get advantage on your roll or disadvantage on your roll, or if you're rolling plus your attack bonus or plus a skill. And because this is so flexible and so kind of fluid, it really, I think, does require everyone to be on the same basic wavelength, which is totally fine. But I feel like it is a game that is designed for a group of people who are always or almost always in sync with each other. And I feel like I have been in a lot of great gaming groups. I have never been in a gaming group that has been 100% in sync with each other at all times.
Yeah.
With different expectations and different desires of what the game is going to be. And I think I'm a little worried that this is going to be too fluid, and ultimately it's not going to be in service to anything, because you're just going to end up coming down to either being like, well, all right, I guess you're rolling +8 on this because I can't justify telling you no on these tags, or you're just going to roll between +1 and +3. And then I'm just like, well, why am I not playing Ironsworn?
Yeah, exactly. I think we said kind of off air that if you kind of wanted to power game or cheese this, the tag system can kind of become a bit tiresome. So you do need to be on that wavelength a little bit. So
Yeah.
Anyway, that's our check in on our list of games done. I'm now currently trailing Steve 2-1. And I'm not counting Well, if we tie at the end of the year, then we'll get half points for every one of each other's games that we played. That's the tiebreaker. But talking about cheesing things leads us nicely into our topic this week, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Homebrew and what that is, what it means, and why we do it. Because we do it, right? And I've been kind of thinking about this, and I was thinking about my first ever experiences with Homebrew in TTRPGs, and I keep thinking, it was this kind of like system that I kind of half designed, half cribbed from somewhere else, in this completely kind of Homebrew setting, which did actually take a lot from another game, and I kind of mashed it together. But then actually I think about it, the very first game I ever ran for other people, the Edge of the Empire game I ran for my friends 10 years ago this summer, I took the quick start adventure called The Escape from Moshuta, and I changed a bunch of it. Now, that's not really Homebrew, I guess, but it's kind of like cracking the adventure design part of it and just changing that. I then also think about how prevalent this is in other mediums. Like, everyone plays board games with the odd house rule, don't they? Like, it's, you've never played Uno by the rules because every player has their own rules. Like, me and my friend Andy played the X-Wing miniatures game for years, and we homebrewed the way that Ordnance worked because we thought it was bad, and then when they did the new edition of the game, they changed the rule to our home rule. And sometimes you have games that have community home rules that they figure these little fixes out for themselves. But in TTRPGs, it seems to be really, really prevalent, and I think it's mainly because you can just do it. If you sit down to play a video game, you can't just rewrite the code of the game to fit your proclivities and your preferences for games, right? But in TTRPGs, you absolutely can. And I wanted to kind of talk about where I find it interesting and also where I find it really, really frustrating. But what's your general attitude towards Homebrew and your experiences with it?
Yeah, so I think first of all, my kind of first question is are we creating a delineation between homebrew settings and that kind of thing versus homebrew rules? or are we kind of lumping it all in together?
I think
I feel like
there is a delineation, isn't there?
yeah,
Because you are encouraged by most games to come up with your own settings and your own world building and things like that. But games don't often encourage you to rewrite the rules of the game. They will sometimes, if you've got games that like have modular systems, they tell you like you pick and choose what you want to use. Some games, especially rules light games, say if you don't like this rule, ignore it. But in terms of the homebrew, I think I would like to lean more towards the rule part of it, and like what's your first experience, or what's your attitude towards, if you don't like something, let's rewrite it, let's change it.
yeah. I struggle a lot with wanting to play a game rules as written first, and kind of it feels a little bit like the same feeling I get when writing, where it's like you have to learn the rules of grammar in order to then break them to do something interesting. And so it's oftentimes when I'm starting out with a game, I think sometimes even too rigid, where it's like, nope, this is the way that it's written, this is how we're going to play it. And that Scum and Villainy game I mentioned earlier had a very similar experience, where I reached a point where they were trying to upgrade their ship, and I was like, nope, well, you have to level up, and you have to spend your advances to advance your ship. And they were like, okay, but we just stole a bunch of gear from a shipyard. Like, we have that stuff now. Why can't we put it on our ship? I'm like, well, you can. You just have to advance and spend those upgrades to get it. And I think there were other ways that I could have done it. An easy one would have been like, all right, that sounds like a long-term project. So those are all ways to handle that within the game. So all that to say, I oftentimes am starting from a place of, I want to get it right and play it rules as written. And then once I've done that, then I'm more open to homebrewing, because ultimately it's about having fun at the table. And, whoever the game designer is, unless they're a friend of yours, they're probably not going to kick in the door and tell you that you're playing the game wrong. So I guess that was a long way around to say I'm pro homebrew.
Right. Okay. Cool.
I did not get a lot of sleep last night, so I said two, a 3-word sentence in about 50 words, right?
Yeah, and that's the episode, everyone. Thanks for watching. I feel the same way about it that you do. I'm perhaps a little more. I'm a little wary of jumping straight in and homebrewing something, and like, to use an analogy from something else, right? The whole kind of like, oh, I'm going to cook dinner and here's a recipe, but I'm going to change it before I've tried cooking it. And there is a big difference between me, someone who worked for nearly a decade in kitchens, saying, okay, I can see what's what the kind of mechanisms of this recipe are, and I'm probably going to try this rules as written, but like, I can also see like what's being attempted here, and I could probably, with a fair amount of professional experience, change this a little bit to achieve the desired effect. And I think my biggest issue is, I feel like most people playing games just want to change something to make it theirs, and they don't possibly consider what effect they're kind of having. And I had a conversation recently, and with a friend of mine, and I know they listen to this, so I'm sorry for calling you out, buddy, but like, they discovered a game that I'd recommended to them, and they were like, "Oh, this game's incredible." And then within a week, they had rewritten the entire rulebook, and they had rewritten it to like arbitrarily meet some standard of another game. And I was like, "But why? But why have you done that?" And they were like, "Well, because I want it to be more like game X. This is game Y, and I want it and I'm like, game X exists, right?
Yeah.
He's like, well, I want the setting of game Y in the game of game X, and I'm like, but I kind of understand that, but the settings in the games are so bespoke and unique that like they're that way for a reason, and but at the same time, you don't want to say like just go for it. If you want to do it. But like, and I don't know what stage they're at with this project, but it's like. That to me felt like madness to like say, well, I haven't played this game, but I think it's fundamentally wrong, essentially, and not enough like this other game that I have played. So I'm just going to merge the two together in this way. And you know what? Like, probably if I actually read what they'd done, they're a very experienced role player, played a lot of games, probably all right. But like. What are we doing here? like what are we doing? And to use the cookie analogy, you get these things on Reddit all the time. These like people are like, well, I tried this recipe. It said that I needed like chuck steak, but I didn't have chuck steak, so I used cat food, and it was awful. 0 out of 10. It was just like, what are you doing? Like like I will invariably, if I see a recipe. I will invariably do it as close as I can to what's intended. If, for instance, like I came across a great recipe the other day and I just assumed it was a misprint because it had no garlic in it. So I was like, okay, if it doesn't say at least 2 cloves of garlic per person, at least, then it must be a misprint or a huge mistake, or the person reading it was having an aneurysm. Like, so I'll alter that, but I kind of accept that is for my tastes, and I feel like a lot of people who are super into homebrewing systems rather than settings it sometimes can be driven by ego rather than taste. And I'm basing this on personal experience, because when I homebrewed my version of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles After the Bomb setting, which runs on the Palladium system, which is so bad and is like 40 years old now. And I tried to shoehorn that into the Fantasy Flight Games Genesis system and was coming up with my own classes and trying to balance this game. And I was trying to like making all these talent trees and everything and putting on all this work. Whereas like, okay, what actually I've done there was driven by my own ego of trying to say, well, I've written an RPG now. Like I've put this together, and I felt like both of those systems were flawed, but I felt like I was better than them. And I was like, well, actually, I've only actually played one game in my entire life. Like, what am I doing? Like, I've got no experience. But it was that kind of hubris and that ego that drove that. And I look back at it now and I think, hey, man, maybe I should have learnt what was good about those games that I was trying to merge together, and then thought about a solution outside of I'm going to try and jam these two things together. Because like the thing is, that game I think actually exists. I think there is a system out there that's been written that it existed then. Like I think it's called Mutants in the Now. That, like someone had already done that. They'd done that hard work, and I could have just played that. And yeah, this is a long way of kind of like saying that I feel like there are 2 reasons why people homebrew, and I find it quite frustrating sometimes. And one of the reasons why I don't go on Reddit anymore is just people like, well, I'm homebrewing this and this and this for my first go at this game, and I'm like, what? Just play it, have a go first. You know what I mean? Just try and kind of at least understand what the game is attempting before you try and bend it around, something that you kind of prefer in other games.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, and I wonder if it stems from an overarching kind of generalized experience of RPGs as an industry, as a whole kind of collection of of pieces,
Mm.
because originally, I mean, like the first couple of D&D books, like they were mostly a framework, and like there were some like really specific and esoteric rules in there, but a lot of times there were wide open spaces within the rules where when you were sitting down to the table and playing, a situation would come up and the table would look to the game master and be like, okay, what do we do here?
Mm.
And the game master would have to make a ruling. And I think it's can sometimes be a little controversial, but the OSR movement, I think the like rulings versus rules is a kind of big tenet of that movement,
Mm.
of like, let's create kind of the basic framework of a system, and then from there it's up to the game master or the players at the table, or however that kind of social contract works, to make decisions in the moment about how that should play out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of philosophy, I feel like, creates a world in which homebrew is expected.
Mm.
And so when you get into more of these indie games, where indie games are like they're trying to answer a specific question, whereas like, D&D is a role-playing game, and we can talk about how like today it is designed in certain ways to evoke certain experiences, but like that's not how it's used,
Mm.
and that's not how it's been used in the course of the hobby, because when it first started out, there weren't as many RPGs, there weren't these kind of bespoke systems that did one thing really well.
Mm-hmm.
And so people would just kind of cobble together systems and like homebrew systems to add on to their D&D game. And so I wonder if now we're in this wonderful time where there are so many RPG systems and games available that you can basically find a system to do the thing that you really want it to do.
Mm.
But because we have this history, this general, kind of vibe towards homebrewing as part of the system, I wonder if that just leads to people being like, well, I did this homebrew thing for my D&D game, so why can't I then sit down and for this game that I'm playing that's a really narrow specific system,
Mm-hmm.
well, I can just add on little bits because that's kind of expected within the zeitgeist of the hobby. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great point. I think that it's been part of the hobby from the beginning, and the fact that ultimately what you're doing is reading from a book or reading from some scraps of paper and just kind of imagining stuff. Like it's not like you have to rewrite the rules on a game card or change the game pieces. Like, it's so easy to do. And there's also like this kind of gray area as well. Like, there's so many things from other games that you can use in other games that is kind of like the halfway step between homebrewing something. For instance, using the oracles from Ironsworn in any other game, right?
Yep.
It's not strictly speaking homebrew. It's a little tool that you've taken from one game and used in another. To take that step a little further, I'm going to run Escape from Dino Island for my friends. The very same like role-playing group that I started with 10 years ago. We're going to celebrate our 10th anniversary this summer, and I'm going to run a one-shot of Escape from Dino Island. It's a fun, breezy, powered by the apocalypse game. I looked at it and I was just like, yep, this is exactly, I understand this. It's got everything that you'd expect a powered by the apocalypse game to have. But then I was like, well, hang on, people have got gear listed. The gear doesn't do anything. That's fine. But like, it's just a list. So I was like, well, why don't I use the personal quarters ruling from the Between and powered by Brindlewood Games, Carbon Brindlewood Games, where your kit doesn't do anything beyond giving you the narrative permission to use it. Like, if you can't shoot a dinosaur if you don't have a gun, but if you mark it off and scratch it off your list, once in the game you can have advantage on the roll. You know what I mean? And that's how that works. And I'm like, well, hang on, that's a nice little step that just takes the equipment that people have and gives it a little more, like, makes it a resource they have to manage. And in a survival game, that's kind of fun, right? I don't want to be tracking water and things like that. I don't want to be like granular about, how these people are literally surviving. But why don't you give the players a little choice and, get them to tick something off and say, well, you can still use that thing, but you won't be able to get an advantage on it. But, if you want to narrate how you've done something really cool just once, that's great. Now, that's kind of like a little more homebrewy. And I feel comfortable doing that because it's like taking one little system from a Powered by the Apocalypse game and just moving it into another Powered by the Apocalypse game, and it doesn't break anything.
Sure.
But then I certainly have broken games, and if I got out the work I did on this homebrew game I put together, like, I just broke 2 games and put them together in a game that barely functioned, that could have been, and this was before I understood what SRDs were, and I could have just taken, Caltrop Core or something and made this game so simply with the blank rules that you can download for $5. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's there are so many ways that the hobby and the kind of like the scene encourages you to create your own things, because like homebrew is in essence a form of expression. But I just feel like, there is probably a game out there that you could write rather than bending another one round what you want to happen.
Do you think that there is a definable difference in the grand scheme of things between homebrewing a game to a point where it becomes a different game versus writing something from the ground up? Because, I mean, basically every single published RPG is homebrew, where somebody had an idea that they wanted to focus on and they built systems around it. And the difference, I think, typically is that you have a system that kind of grows up around this idea, this kernel of an idea, and that can then evolve into something else, going the pipeline from Powered by the Apocalypse to Blades in the Dark and Forged in the Dark systems to Ironsworn. Like, those are all kind of homebrews of each other, as there's this evolution in the system where a designer starts to think like, okay, well, this is, a 2d6 plus a stat, and we've got these 3 success ranges. Well, what if it's a pool of d6 and, you just take the highest one? Or what if it's 1d6, but instead of a range of successes, you've got 2 challenge dice? But like, it's all stemming from that same basic concept of, okay, we have a resolution system where you roll dice and you have, instead of a binary yes no, it's a no maybe yes. So like, even that could be considered an evolution of, the original binary with the d20 of, so like, is there a definable, really, just when you get down to the basics, is there a difference between creating your own system versus hacking a system, other than like, okay, you published it,
Yeah.
and now it's its own thing, right?
But that's interesting because, like, you've said the word that we haven't said so far, which is hack, which is
Yeah,
like I feel like there's a difference between homebrew because it kind of implies that this is a personal thing that you prefer to put in your version of the game, and you know, like for instance, my Starforge campaign, I used a custom stat array for Archer, right?
yeah,
And I then found out afterwards that, well, after I'd done it, but before I recorded, that was actually the stat array from the Lodestar supplement. So it wasn't really homebrew. But in Sundered Isles, I've used a custom stat array because I was like, I kind of think one's too strong and what's in the book is maybe like too punishing. So we're in the middle. Is that homebrewing? Kinda, I guess, but it's not like I've added a stat or I've made it maximum. You know, everyone starts at 5 for all the stats. Like that's not it. But like the hack idea is like I am deliberately taking this system and I am deliberately seeking to change it for a different result. Not like we're playing with some loose homebrew rules, and the hack part of it sort of implies, and I don't know whether I'm misguided in this, that it is a little more formal, like I'm writing this down, like and I think that might seem like an arbitrary distinction to make between homebrew and hack, but I do think it's kind of important. Hack kind of implies a little more design thought behind it, I think, whereas homebrew to me says this is a change that I'm making to kind of just satisfy something we think is missing from the game in like, maybe it's because the word home's in it, that I think it just
yeah.
has to be applied to home games. And really, if I think about it, my homebrew disaster from 2016 was really a hack. I kind of tried to, but it wasn't hacking one game to make it better. It was hacking 2 games to make them both worse. I think maybe my resistance, should we say, to accepting homebrew is I think I just find bad homebrew stories so I find them so maddening sometimes, and
Yeah.
sometimes when people say, well, I'm playing this game but I'm going to make some changes to it, and the changes they suggest are frankly insane. Like, or like they get to the point where like if you just take a step back from this, there's
Yeah.
probably another game you could play that is exactly what you're looking for,
Yeah.
but they don't know it, or they haven't quite seen the wood for the trees type thing, you know. And for example, like saying, well, let's play Blaze in the Dark, but we're going to hack in grid turn-based combat. Like that is a stupid idea that misunderstands what Blades in the Dark is. And that's not to say that grid-based turn-based combat is bad in RPGs, but there are other games that you could play that give you that. And it's
Yeah.
easier to homebrew the setting of Duskfall into a turn-based grid-based system than it is to hack turn-based grid-based combat into Blades in the Dark. Does that make sense?
It does. I do think that it is. I, I definitely I see where you're coming from, kind of in one direction, but I feel like in the other direction, so often it's D&D, right? Like so often it's okay. Well, here's D&D plus X or Y or Z, and I think that's and so often we as people who enjoy indie games get frustrated when somebody's like, oh well, you could do that in D&D, you just have to like change these 3 stats and like add this other thing into it, and we're like, but you could play Ironsworn and just be happier. But I think that also speaks to the eternal challenge that D&D is the behemoth that people recognize. They know how to play it, even though it's not the easiest game in existence to learn. And there are a lot of like fiddly rules, especially the more modern versions. But it's so ubiquitous that people are, and sadly, I think this is a real issue because I've experienced it where I'm like, okay, can we play literally any other game? I was like, no, but we want to play D&D. We like D&D.
Mm.
So, but we want to play a sci-fi game. So let's play D&D in space. And I'm like, but we could play a better game that does the things that we want it to do better. And so I wonder if like there's that tension of I want to play a game other than D&D, a different setting, I want it to do different things, but my group of friends will only play D&D, so I have to go on the internet and be like, how do I do this in D&D?
Yeah, exactly.
And then that it's a lot of homebrew, because the answer usually is, well, you have to completely change a whole bunch of parts of the system in order to make this thing work. And I think I'm less bothered by it than you are, which amuses me. I feel like you get real offended by the the ridiculousness of what people are doing on the internet.
I enjoy hearing about it. I kind of get this, and I love watching like YouTube videos about kind of disastrous role playing game sessions. I don't know why I like it so much.
And I'm mostly just like, you know what? If it is fun for you, go for it. Like, don't try to make it into its own thing that we make everybody else play.
Yeah. And I think
that's the fantasy heartbreaker, right? Like that's the whole thing with the fantasy heartbreaker. Is 100%. Like, well, it's D&D, but this stat is the most important in the game, and so I'm gonna do a bunch of stuff to make this thing because I really like Constitution as the best stat.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that you're right as well in saying that, like, because D&D is the most prevalent game everywhere, and for years we have been told it can do anything you want it to do. That basically says, yes, you can, but you have to. When you realize it really can't. It takes a lot of work to get there, and the kind of the general idea that a lot of people don't know that there's games beyond D&D and Pathfinder and those kind of things. The solution is to homebrew and is to hack and change rather than find something that fits the very specific niche that they're kind of looking to kind of fit themselves into. But yeah. Anyway, this is a short episode. Like because we're on the clock because daylight savings and Steve's work commitments. But I enjoyed talking about homebrew. I enjoy talking about people's insane ideas without having to get too specific. But also, like, isn't it great that you can have an insane idea and explore it and just kind of do it? And people can't do that with video games, and they can't sit and rewrite the movie they're watching or kind of tear pages out of the book they're reading, but they can with role-playing games. And even though it does drive me nuts sometimes, I actually really like it, and I actually really like, it's a feature, not a bug. Anyway,
and I think it is important, I think it's important to the hobby that people keep homebrewing, because that is how new systems are born. And so it's like, I would say we're pro homebrew, but if you're trying to homebrew a game that you've never played before, maybe just give it a shot first. Although I would love to, and maybe if people are interested in this, we can do another episode, but I would love to talk specifically about Ironsworn homebrew, because there's a whole list of different things, and I certainly, we don't want to slag anybody off, and I don't think that's what it would be, because I think there's some really awesome takes on Ironsworn, and that's the great thing about homebrew. It's like anything, like bad homebrew is eye rolling and frustrating, but then good homebrew, you're like, actually, that's brilliant. So I would love to talk a little bit if people want, in a future episode about specifically Ironsworn homebrew and some of the cool ideas that people have with that, and maybe even some ways to homebrew, your Ironsworn game. I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you think? Do you think that would be fun?
I mean, I'll drop the pretense. Me and Steve have talked about this for weeks. We've got something. We are thinking about something in Ironsworn that we would alter or change or look at investigating other ways to do, because I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had about some features of Ironsworn that perhaps don't quite hit the notes that we want for our campaigns, that probably work perfectly well for other people. And I think it was since Blades in the Dark Deep Cuts has come out that we've seen that idea of like, and John Harper even says it in the notes, like, this module comes from my home rule that I put in my home games, and I watched people home rule this in like games that were streamed, so it's now an optional rule. And I think that we've started to think about, hey, Ironsworn as a game is coming up to being a decade old, and like, at some point people are going to be reading Ironsworn and going, hey, this is a product of its time. This is showing its age, and like, these things evolve. And we've had some ideas broadly about things that we would change, or ideas that we'd like to explore. So there will be another video, everyone, that we probably would have talked about it a little bit, but we were on the clock, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, anyway, that was homebrew responsibly is what we're saying.
That's right.
And play
both in your gaming and if you're brewing other things.
Yeah, exactly. Play the game first and homebrew responsibly. That is the message. Anyway, thanks, Steve, and goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.